Public Service Commission to order. I have to note that yesterday someone called our office and asked why are we calling this a special, why are we meeting at 9:30 for this special session? And since my family always accuses me of never leaving a bad joke unturned, that's why we call it special. Which this item before us today is item 501. And it's always, as Gary Brown noted, it's always nice to be in this position because everyone has to laugh at even your bad jokes. Item 501 is case number 15M0388, which is the Charter Communications and Time Warner Cable joint petition for approval of the transfer of control, reorganization, and financing arrangements. That is the only matter in front of us today, and Peter McGowan, who's my chief policy advisor, will be presenting this today, and we also have staff at the table for additional questions. Peter, please begin.
Good morning. You have before you a draft order concerning the joint petition. It's filed by Charter Communications and Time Warner. The petition was filed in July of 2015 for the authorization of a holding company level transaction that would result in the transfer of control of certain Time Warner subsidiaries to Charter. Under applicable and recently amended public service law, the Commission must determine whether the merger would produce a net public benefit for New Yorkers. So the transaction involves both Time Warner's and Charter's cable, television, telephone, and broadband operations. Charter currently operates networks that are available to roughly 40,000 customers in the Chatham area and north in the Plattsburgh areas. Time Warner operates networks available to roughly 5 million, or over 60% of New York State's 8.2 million New York residential customers and business customers, making this transaction hugely important for the state of New York. In terms of the process that the Commission has used for this transaction, there has been significant public interest in the transaction. We have held 5 separate public general forums across 3 major cities in New York, Buffalo, Albany, and New York City. And we've also received numerous comments, written comments, as well as a number of other letters that have all been considered for this decision today. So let me just review the highlights of the order. First, in terms of the standard of review, the order finds that the legislative intent of the recently amended Public Service Law review provision applicable to cable mergers is best interpreted and applied to the particular facts of this case by requiring a demonstration of net positive benefits. The public interest review that was conducted is guided by the broad public service law obligations and related policies concerning cable and telecommunications services. The review also recognizes that the same technology that enables voice and video offerings also provides broadband internet access. And broadband services are increasingly being used by consumers as a substitute for traditional voice and video offerings. Thus, expanding the availability and affordability of broadband promotes consumer choice and competition in both voice and video markets. In addition, state commissions are obligated under federal law to encourage the deployment of advanced telecommunications infrastructure capable of delivering broadband services to all New Yorkers. For these reasons, the Commission's consideration of the impact of the transaction includes its impact on broadband availability and affordability. Next, let me turn to the commitments that petitioners put forth during this case. Petitioners have indicated that the transaction will enable many public interest benefits, such as infrastructure investment, service quality improvements, and greater access to affordable internet service. However, the petitioners have not made concrete commitments to share the projected synergy savings with New York consumers. Therefore, to ensure that the promised benefits, consumer benefits, are delivered to New York, a number of enforceable conditions are proposed in the draft order. These conditions are designed to deliver the consumer benefits promised by the petitioners and also ensure that a share of the projected synergy savings will inure to the benefit of New York consumers and produce net positive public interest benefits. Let me turn finally to the highlights of the proposed conditions in the draft order. First, to improve consumer access to modern cable broadband network services, the draft order would require New Charter to expand its network to an additional 145,000 unserved and underserved households and businesses within its franchise territory within 4 years. This would mean that a modern cable network will pass virtually all of the homes and businesses within Time Warner's franchise. Second, the draft order requires New Charter to upgrade its systems to all digital and deliver at least 100 megabits throughout its New York State territory by the end of 2018. Currently, Time Warner generally offers speeds of up to 50 megabits outside the New York metro area. And further, it's required to upgrade its networks to enable up to 300 megabits by the end of 2019. I would note that while Time Warner offers up to 300 megabits in the New York City metropolitan areas and has announced plans to expand its 300 megabit offering in its major markets nationwide, it has not made concrete plans to do so in upstate New York. These conditions will also result in the upgrade of the Charter network in the Chatham, New York area. The Chatham, New York area has video services, but that network does not offer two-way communications. Thus, taken together, these conditions make substantial progress towards the new New York broadband program's goal of bringing high-speed broadband to all New Yorkers. So that's the first area concerning access to a modern network. Second, concerning the digital divide or affordability. To improve broadband affordability and address the digital divide, the draft order commends New Charter's proposed low-income program and requires New Charter to provide its new low-income program offering, which will be at least 30 megabits at no more than $14.99, with eligibility available to families receiving free and reduced lunch benefits and senior citizens receiving federal supplemental security income benefits. I estimate that this program will be available to roughly 700,000 low-income consumers in New York State. In addition, New Charter must also continue to offer Time Warner's most affordable basic internet offering, the Everyday Low Price, which is available at $14.99 for 2 years from the close. This basic affordable offering is available without limitations on eligibility. New Charter will also be required to offer free broadband service to 50 community centers or anchor institutions in unserved or underserved communities. Next, concerning service quality improvements. To ensure that New Charter remains focused on improving customer service, the order requires the company to maintain no net reduction in customer-facing employees in New York State for 4 years from the date of the order, and to invest $50 million in customer service programs over 2 years, and to achieve a 35% improvement in its PSC complaint rate for cable service over 5 years, with a milestone of 17.5% improvement by the end of 2018. For each of these milestones, there is a $2.5 million incentive associated with the targets. Another benefit that will result from the merger is the introduction by New Charter of its 60 megabit standalone broadband product that will be faster and lower priced relative to many Time Warner comparable offerings. Actually, many offerings that are by Time Warner that are even not as fast as 60 megabits. So these new standalone broadband and associated bundled offerings will enable consumers to receive significant price benefits. So those are the highlights of the conditions. Based on the record, the draft order proposes that the Commission conclude that with the enforceable conditions outlined in the draft order and summarized here, together with commitments that New Charter has made, the merger will produce substantial net benefits for New York and is therefore in the public interest. Staff estimates that these conditions will advance the public interest in New York by producing incremental consumer benefits of approximately $435 million over the next 5 years and associated investments of $655 million for a combined economic benefit of over $1 billion. I'd like to just thank a bunch of the DPS, actually on behalf of Kim and Tom Congdon, I'd like to thank, I won't get them all, but I do want to thank Brian Osius, Graham Jesmer, Joe Yakel, Rick Schuler, Sean Eisenhower, Len Silverstein, Pat Barry, Mike Augstell, Peggy Manupella, and many more for their contributions to this fairly intense and significant review that we have done. I'd also like to thank our colleagues at the Broadband Program Office who we have worked closely with and who have been most helpful to our consideration of this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions for Peter or any of the staff? Commissioner Berman?
Could you just flush out a little bit for me the legal public interest standard, just to clarify it?
I would love to allow Kim Harriman to do that.
Sure, Commissioner. As Peter mentioned, the governor, through his leadership, accomplished an amendment to 222 of the PSL, which is the review standard that's applicable to the cable portion of the transaction. And in amending that statute, especially in light of the legislative intent and its comparability to Section 70 of the PSL, it converted the standard there from if there's no harm, you shall say yes, to there must be a benefit in order for you to say yes. And that has real meaningful impact to the analysis that's outlined in the draft order before you. Specifically, as Peter mentioned, it is a determination whether or not the transaction on its face presents a net benefit to the public interest. And in evaluating what constitutes a net benefit to the public interest, we have to look at the provisions of PSL that are applicable to the transaction and the general policies of the Commission while being guided by the policies of the state. So it is in that vein that the transaction was evaluated, and on the face of the petition, solely on the face of the petition, it was found to not have met the statutory standard for the net benefit test. And that is why the order before you is actually a approval with conditions, whereby if the company does not accept the conditions, the order would be ineffective rejection of the petition or denial of the petition. So the standard, again, is comparable to Section 70 in looking for a net benefit from the transaction, and where there's not one on the face of the petition like the Commission has done before, it can come up with conditions that would bring the transaction into meeting the standard.
Thank you.
Anything more? Commissioner Sarah, any questions?
No questions.
Okay. I have none either. So first of all, I echo your comments, Peter. I'm very much appreciative of the hard work that the staff has done on this. Not only the Office of Telecommunications staff, the General Counsel, but also my chief advisor, starting with you, as well as Kim and as well as Tom. I know There's been considerable back and forth and analysis, and I believe as the recommended order in front of us really reveals a lot of good hard thinking about what is necessary for New York and what's in the best interest of New York, both Time Warner's customers as well as New York as a whole. So I thank you all for that. I also want to extend my appreciation to our colleagues at the broadband office. They've been immensely helpful for us in terms of their understanding of these technologies and what we can do and should be doing in this state, and I'm very appreciative of that. I'm going to vote in favor of the recommended decision, and I'm going to do so for a number of reasons. First, I do agree that with not only statutorily are we obligated under the expanded obligations put in place by Governor Cuomo to make certain that there are true net enforceable benefits associated with this transaction, but it would be certainly, I think, even without that, a real concern for the state if we didn't find those net benefits. I mean, this, when we think about what's happened since the nascency of the internet, we've clearly moved to a technology where every day each of us is dependent on some form of communications, whether it's voice communications, whether it's video communications, whether it's internet or email communications or data communications. We're entirely dependent on them on any sort. And as a matter of fact, the technology around these communications have converged around the broadband. And that for us to be able to have a modern communications network in New York that's essential for the 20 million or so New Yorkers who barely use it every day and every hour in some form or another, plus the visitors in every aspect of their lives, whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's social networking or other piece of their life, and not think that we're going to have the type of first-class internet service and broadband service that Governor Cuomo has announced as a requirement for the state in the form of 100 megabits, to my mind would mean that this commission has not met its responsibility to the public. And when we consider on top of that that Time Warner serves 2.6 million subscribers or more than 5 million individuals, it makes it even more important that we look at this transaction and consider its impact not only on the individual subscribers but on the state as a whole. So I absolutely agree that while the company filed a number of different commitments without enforceable concrete requirements and commitments that are not clear are hardly commitments that we can count on. They are not sufficient to have net benefits, and that only if the company were to agree to the various conditions that are set forth in the merger would I be able to find it's in the public interest. But with those, I believe that we are serving the public, and there is a net public benefit, and I endorse moving forward. In terms of that, the Commission has had over the last year not only the benefit of hearing from the public about this particular transaction, we've spent an awful lot of time thinking about telecommunications in general, and have had a lot of hearings, and we've heard a lot from consumers about what they want and desire out of their communications network. And I think we could put them in many of the conditions that we see in the order are absolutely essential, I think, for the public, for the people who are buying these services to say this is what they deserve. One is in terms of modernization and speed. Governor Cuomo has set up a great standard of saying that we should get at least 100 megabits throughout the state. As we move forward into the 21st century, we continue to need speed because we're requiring these services for everything we do. So one of the things that I think is important in the merger conditions is that Time Warner is not only required to put in 100 megabits in the next couple of years, but is actually required to go to the 300 megabit standard. Time Warner has already has 300 megabits in the city. I think it's very clear that as we move through this, everybody in the state needs those types of speeds. We can't have businesses throughout the state who have different types of quality of service, so getting us there is very important. The other piece is in terms of network expansion. the very fact that we still have people across New York who are not able to get access to high-speed internet is really a problem. It's obviously a problem that the broadband office itself is looking to undertake, but I think the fact that we're so many people in Time Warner's franchise area who don't have service itself, it's very critical that we do that build out, and having that commitment to 145,000 will mean, as Peter said, that a substantial number of these customers will now have access to the same level of broadband service and therefore the same level of telecommunications service as everybody else in the state. I believe that from that, we're looking at an order of over $300 million apiece for each of those types of commitments, and they are essential commitments. The other element that I think is very important is in terms of pricing. And that takes several pieces. One is the issue is that Time Warner today offers a standard standalone internet service that they call their basic, or I can't remember the name right now, everyday low price, which a lot of people like. The last thing we wanted is for this merger to occur and people not to have that service available to them. So I think it's very important that as part of the merger condition, New Charter agrees to keep this service in place for at least 3 years for existing customers and 2 years for new customers, so that people don't see an immediate uptick in their prices. I also we heard from a number of people throughout our hearings about the importance of standalone service. We are moving into an era where people are going off the grid and they want standalone internet, they want it at high speeds, and they want it at an affordable price. I think it's going to be a great advantage and necessity for this merger to get to the 60 megabits of speed at less than $60, I think $59.99 standalone across the state. The other thing that I believe is really important for that is that the standard pricing. The fact that you don't have people in northern New York and western New York and southern tier of New York paying more for the same service as other people, I think is really very important. So getting that is essential. Digital divide is something that we've talked about a lot. There are too many people in New York who don't have access at all. These are people who are sort of at the bottom of the economic scale. But what's really essential is, as the internet itself has become an essential service, we can't expect people to be able to access the services they need unless they have access to affordable internet. One of the things I think is very important to this merger is that we get a low-income program. We heard a lot about this last year when we were talking about the potential acquisition by Comcast, that the Comcast program, which was limited to school lunch, was insufficient. So I think of having a low-income program, which is required in this order, that looks at both the school lunch eligible individuals as well as Social Security supplemental income individuals who are seniors, really expands that. Now, as Peter said, that's approximately 700,000 new New Yorkers who will now have access to affordable internet, not at a minimal speed, which is what we were going to get out of Comcast, but actually at 30 megabits, which is a good speed, and also not have credit checks associated with being able to get this service is going to be essential to get them on. And I'm hopeful that the 700,000 number is a low number and that we are able to work with the local communities and get that done and get it done fast. The other piece that I think is really important is having 50 areas in the state which will get free broadband access at community centers. We heard a lot about that from folks in the city in particular. Getting those community area centers access gives people who can't afford internet at home an opportunity to go somewhere and get good internet access for free, but also really then again stresses the importance of having that access. Those pieces to me really then become the elements of what a 21st century broadband world and communication world looks like in New York, and really complements what Governor Cuomo's vision of what he wants for this state and what the broadband office is going to unleash. I'm hopeful with all of these conditions, we really are going to be in a position that in the next several years, we're going to see all New Yorkers have access to well-priced, high-speed, modern internet services that we really need for every aspect of our lives. The other pieces that I think are very important to the merger approval and are certainly something, again, we heard about a lot, were customer service. I don't want to take this lightly, but guess what, folks? Nobody likes the cable guy. And we really need to think about how do we improve customer service. This is a problem throughout the industry, not just one that Time Warner had, but this was not going to happen unless we saw real improvement. So we have a condition in the merger that they have to improve customer service. Michael Corso does not want to hear from Charter customers, and so we're going to require them to reduce their customer complaints to us by 35% with a tiered approach every year and put $50 million into improving customer service. We also believe that job retention is going to be essential. Every merger is associated with synergies. One way companies obtain synergies is through job reductions. We get that. But at the same time, we're not going to get where we need to go in terms of customer service and customer awareness if we reduce the customer-facing jobs in New York. So one of the things that we're doing as a condition is to require that there is no net loss in customer-facing jobs in New York for the first 4 years following the merger. There are a number of other conditions that I think are important. These were the ones that were certainly very important to me. As Peter said, I think that when you think about it, in total $1.1 billion in merger benefits, which I believe is a conservative number, is about what we deserve and need in this state. But more importantly, we need to make sure that these conditions are real, concrete, and enforceable. I think that the recommended order does that, and for that I am prepared to vote in favor of it. So thank you. Commissioner Sayre.
I also support the proposed order. As Peter McGowan and Kim Harriman both said, we're required by state law to ensure that this merger produces real positive benefits to New York. And federal law explicitly encourages state commissions like this one to maximize broadband service, which to me means both availability and affordability of broadband. I think the broadband provisions, for the reasons stated by Chair Zibelman, are really the most important pieces of this order, although I don't mean to deprecate the others. But we're addressing both availability and affordability in what we're requiring the merger parties to accept as a condition of our concurrence with this merger. We're requiring substantial service extensions, as has already been explained, the continuation of an affordable price that has no income limitations, and a new low-income program that really should help address the digital divide and what people call the homework gap for students who need to do their homework on the internet, but they don't have the internet to do it. We also require, as has been stated, substantial increases in speed and service upstate. One thing not discussed yet in detail is the relationship between the governor's Broadband for All program and this merger. The Broadband for All program has allocated $500 million for broadband expansion to unserved areas in New York State. And what we're doing in this order with respect to that program is requiring Charter to bid for those funds. They won't get credit. They can't use those funds to meet their commitments that we're imposing on this order, but they're required in addition to the commitments that we're requiring. We're requiring them to bid on the Broadband for All funds to make additional extensions on the assumption that the Broadband for All program conditions are comparable to the conditions of the previous New York plan, the Connect New York program. So I think we have the possibility of a double benefit here. With these conditions, which the parties have to accept as a condition of our approval, I'm convinced that the net impact of this transaction will be very positive for New York.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. There are 3 separate viable actions we can choose to carry out today on this merger. We can first accept the petition as is. We can allow the petition with certain enforceable and real conditions, or we can deny the petition outright. Before I decided what the appropriate course of action is on this merger petition, it was important to me that I stepped back and reflected on what my responsibility is under our telecom merger legal standard of review. That is the public interest standard. We need to determine this public interest standard with an understanding of three landscapes: historical, current, and future. These include, to me, a rich history of enhancing competition, existing public policy objectives and realities of the telecom and cable TV marketplace, customer protections and benefits, including access, quality, and affordability, economic development impact, and the fluid nature of this communication marketplace, especially as it concerns the evolution of technology and innovation. The biggest piece that stands out to me is the aspects as they concern broadband, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So to review all of this, first we have to look at, do we approve the petition as is? In principle, the petition put forth was a step in the right direction, but we needed to look at the petition as a whole, and we needed to see, based on the facts and the circumstances, did this meet our legal standard? The petition was insufficient in scope and scale and lacked crucial post-merger precision on fundamental aspects. These failings seemed likely to affect the long-term success of the merger goals and didn't give me comfort that they would meet our statutory obligation if we approved it just as is. Therefore, in my opinion, I do agree with staff's assessment that on its face, and based on the facts and circumstances as presented at this time, accepting the petition as is does not meet the public interest standard. So then we need to look at the petition and we need to say, is this failing on its face that it should be denied outright without any attempt by this commission to extract necessary and appropriate conditions to ensure that the public interest standard has been met? I don't believe a denial outright is appropriate. Based on the comments that we've received, based on the public statement hearings that we've gone to, for me, we needed to figure out a way to look at our obligations that we had and see, based on the petition, which was a very good faith effort in trying to show what the capabilities were and what the opportunities were in New York to provide the net benefits to all. So as I see it, we have an obligation to really look carefully at what the conditions should be, what are necessary and appropriate. So thus, we're left with analyzing what the appropriate conditions are, and if accepted in their entirety, will they be sufficient to meet the public interest net benefit standard? So again, for me, it comes back to looking at all of the different synergies that are available. And the biggest piece that stood out was the broadband aspect. Today, it's universally agreed that broadband deployment and adoption are important policy goals. Normally, a state regulatory commission might find its ability to achieve these policy goals stymied by its own jurisdictional constraints. A state commission does need to be mindful that any conditions imposed needs to be properly tailored to meet those policy goals without wielding excessive and overarching conditions outside its jurisdiction. Staff clearly understood that concern, and to ensure that there was an appropriate balance, conferred with the New York State Broadband Program Office. Moreover, the conditions imposed as it relates to broadband don't seek to inappropriately grab jurisdiction, but rather seems to align proper benefits uniquely attributable to this merger and place the achievement of the goals with the rightful parties: the marketplace, the broadband office, the customers, and other stakeholders, which we are also a part of. We did not operate in a vacuum in looking at this merger, but rather we looked at what would add value to the public to help achieve the right result. We do have a legitimate interest in considering potential benefits to the consumers that can arise uniquely from this merger, and we do so in a focused and comprehensive way. There are some narrowly tailored conditions that we otherwise in some instances may not have actual jurisdiction over, but to the extent that they help to meet the necessary public interest standard, it's appropriate to allow such conditions to help provide the net public interest benefits. I think this finds the right balance. We do need to endeavor to make sure that we don't weaken competition to the detriment of consumers and businesses, and here we have been successful in this endeavor. I am mindful that this is the first time we are actually deciding a telecom merger under the new statutory public interest standard. In fact, this is the first time that I myself am actually looking at a telecom merger. We need to therefore at this juncture be cognizant of the potential telecom merger positions later that may come before us. Perhaps inevitably the approval of this merger today will lead to a discussion as to what lessons can be drawn from it for future telecom mergers in New York. Quite a few discussions, I would think. In reviewing such mergers, we need to follow a strictly case-by-case approach, assessing each petition on its own merits with the specific facts and circumstances presented to us. We are not locked into only these conditions as the sole factors to successfully meet the public interest standard for merger approval, and in fact, that we shouldn't be locked into them. We really need to look at conditions that would be placed on mergers and see are they the necessary and appropriate tools to shape a telecom merger that is truly in the public interest. The conditions proposed in this draft order address our concerns in a comprehensive, measurable, real, and effective manner. Today would have been Elvis Presley's 81st birthday. One of my favorite quotes of his was, "Do something worth remembering." I think we have achieved that today. I will be voting in favor of approval with conditions. Thank you.
I cannot believe you did not take the opportunity to sing that.
Let me tell you, trying to find an appropriate quote was very difficult.
Thank you. Commissioners, with your indulgence, as you know, Commissioner Akinpour was not able to be with us today. She has had an opportunity to obviously participate throughout this proceeding and has reviewed the recommended decision. She's asked that I read a statement, if you'll bear with me. Thank you. It's with sincere regret that I cannot be with you today to directly participate in this very important proceeding. Though I will not be able to cast my vote at this time, I have closely studied the issues that are before us, and I request that my position in this matter be read into the record. As the Commission considers this case, we must recognize that many residential and business customers in rural areas in the state lack access to broadband at speeds that provide real value from the competitive communications market. We must also recognize that affordability of broadband service remains a concern. Therefore, our public interest inquiry needs to focus on how this transaction will improve both affordability and access. In order to gain our approval, the two companies are required to demonstrate that the transaction promotes New York's interest in a robust, competitive broadband market through expanding and enhancing network access and assuring affordable services. As staff and many commentators point out, the promise of telecommunications and cable competition is elusive if customers do not have access to the cable network or are not able to access advanced networks because standalone broadband services are not affordable. In my opinion, the draft order before you should be approved, given the proposed conditions to increase broadband speed, expand broadband infrastructure to unserved areas, and provide the state's first high-speed broadband program for low-income households. The conditions that we will impose on the companies will also require customer service improvements and employee job retentions. If I could have been with you today, my vote would have been an affirmative one. With the conditions you hopefully will adopt, the merger will bring substantial incremental net benefits to the company's customers in New York. With the acceptance by the companies of these enforceable and concrete incremental benefits, the proposed transaction represents a positive benefit for New Yorkers. And again, we're appreciative of the fact that Commissioner Akinpour could not be here today, but we do know that she has spent a great deal of time with this. But for us, the issue is the three of us. So with that, I'm going to take a vote. All those in favor of approving the proposed merger by these companies conditioned upon their unconditional acceptance of the commitments and conditions of our approval as described in the order and today, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. Again, thank you to the staff, to the broadband office, and to the many, many commenters, as well as the company. We think this, I agree with Commissioner Berman, this is definitely a day for us all to be proud. Thank you. We're at a close. Is there any other thing to become in front of us?
There's nothing else before you today. The next commission session is January 21st.
Thank you.